There was a meeting that happened behind closed doors, a meeting that most Americans will never hear about. But what was discussed in that room could mark the end of the American economy as we know it. I'm talking about a potential US default, and the evidence is mounting that we're closer to this catastrophe than anyone in mainstream media is willing to admit. If you think your life won't change, think again. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will shake you to your core. Welcome back to George Vance Live, where we expose the economic truth that the establishment doesn't want you to know. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this information could mean the difference between financial survival and total devastation. Let's get one thing straight from the beginning. When I say US default, I'm not talking about some abstract economic theory. I'm talking about the United States government being unable to pay its bills. I'm talking about treasury bonds, the safest investment in the world for over 2 centuries, becoming worthless paper. I'm talking about the complete collapse of global financial markets and a reset of the entire world economic order. This isn't hyperbole. This is what default means. Now, you might be thinking, that could never happen to America. We're the richest country in the world. We have the dollar as the global reserve currency. We've never defaulted in our history. And you're right to think that way, because that's exactly what they want you to believe. But here's what they're not telling you. We've never been this close to the edge before, and the mechanisms that saved us in the past are breaking down. Let me take you inside that meeting I mentioned. In late 2025, a closed-door session happened in Washington. The attendees, Treasury officials, Federal Reserve governors, representatives from the largest banks, and key congressional leaders. No press, no public minutes. Just the people who actually control the levers of American finance. According to sources who were briefed on the discussion, the topic was simple and terrifying. What happens when we can no longer service our debt? What's the contingency plan for default? Think about why such a meeting would even be necessary. For decades, the idea of US default was unthinkable. But something has fundamentally changed. Our national debt is now over $35 trillion and growing by roughly $2 trillion every single year. But here's the kicker. The interest payments on that debt have exploded. We're now spending over $1 trillion annually just on interest. That's more than we spend on the entire military, more than we spend on Medicare. It's the fastest growing part of the federal budget, and it's completely unsustainable. Let me break down the math in a way that makes this real. Imagine you make $60,000 a year, but you owe $500,000 on credit cards and loans. And imagine the interest rate on those loans just went from 2% to 5%. Suddenly, your annual interest payment goes from $10,000 to $25,000. You can't pay it from your regular income, so what do? You take out more loans to pay the interest on your existing loans. That's called a debt spiral. And that's exactly where the United States government is right now. The Federal Reserve tried to fight inflation by raising interest rates, which was necessary. But every time they raised rates, they made the government's debt problem exponentially worse. When interest rates were near zero, the government could borrow cheaply. Now, with rates higher, every new bond issued and every old bond that needs to be refinanced costs dramatically more. We're in a trap. Lower rates mean inflation destroys the currency. Higher rates mean the debt becomes impossible to service. There's no good option left. Here's where it gets even more disturbing. Foreign countries are starting to lose faith in US Treasury bonds. For decades, countries like China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia bought our debt because it was considered the safest investment on earth. But over the past 2 years, we've seen unprecedented selling of US Treasuries by foreign holders. China has reduced its Treasury holdings by hundreds of billions. Japan is selling. The Saudis are diversifying into other assets. When the biggest buyers of your debt start walking away, what does that tell you? It tells you they see what's coming. These countries have economic intelligence agencies that rival the CIA. They have access to data and analysis that ordinary citizens will never see. And they're voting with their wallets. They're getting out before the collapse. Meanwhile, the American public is being told everything is fine. The media talks about jobs numbers and GDP growth while ignoring the elephant in the room. Our debt is unsustainable, and the world is starting to notice. Let's talk about what actually happens during a sovereign debt default, because most people have never experienced this and can't imagine it. I want you to understand the cascade of catastrophic events that would follow. First, US Treasury bonds would plummet in value. Every pension fund, retirement account, bank, and insurance company in America holds massive amounts of treasuries. They would all see devastating losses overnight. Your 401k? Cut in half, maybe worse. Your pension? Potentially gone. Banks would face insolvency because their supposedly safe assets are now worthless. The stock market would crash, and I'm not talking about a 10 or 20% correction. We're talking about a potential 50 to 70% decline as the entire financial system seizes up. Credit markets would freeze because nobody trusts anyone else's ability to pay. Businesses can't get loans. Consumers can't get credit cards or mortgages. The economy grinds to a halt. Unemployment would skyrocket as companies lay off workers by the millions because they can't access capital to operate. Social security checks? They might stop coming, or they come but buy almost nothing because the currency has collapsed. Medicare payments to hospitals and doctors? Delayed or stopped entirely. Government workers from postal employees to air traffic controllers might not get paid. Veterans' benefits could be suspended. Everything that people depend on from the federal government would be in jeopardy. And here's the global dimension. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. International trade, from oil to automobiles to food, is conducted in dollars. If the US defaults and the dollar loses its reserve status, global trade collapses. Shipping stops. Supply chains that are already fragile would completely break down. Countries couldn't import food or energy. We're talking about a global depression that makes 2008 look like a minor inconvenience. But let me tell you what's even scarier than the default itself. It's the civil unrest that follows. When people can't feed their families, when their life savings disappear, when they lose their jobs and homes, societies break down. We saw glimpses of this during the Great Depression: hunger marches, violent protests, political extremism. Now imagine that scenario with modern weapons, social media to organize, and a population that has grown accustomed to abundance. The potential for chaos is unprecedented. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. The government won't let this happen. They'll find a way. And you're partially right. The government will do everything in its power to avoid an official default. But here's the thing. There are different kinds of default. There's explicit default, where the government says, we're not paying our bonds. That's the nuclear option, and they'll avoid it at almost any cost. But there's also implicit default through inflation. They pay you back, but with money that's worth a fraction of what you lent them. That's the path they're already on. Think about it. If you bought a $1,000 Treasury bond 10 years ago and the government pays you back today with $1,000 that only buys what $500 used to buy, you've been defaulted on. They just did it in a way that most people don't recognize as default. This is the strategy, and it's already happening. Real inflation is much higher than official numbers suggest, and it's destroying the purchasing power of every dollar you own. The meeting I mentioned at the beginning, the reason it happened is because the people at the top know we're running out of options. They're wargaming scenarios. What if we have to choose between paying bondholders and paying Social Security? What if foreign buyers completely abandon Treasury auctions? What if a major crisis forces massive emergency spending when we're already maxed out on debt? These aren't theoretical questions anymore. These are real scenarios being actively discussed. Here's something most people don't know. The US has actually come very close to technical default several times in recent years during debt ceiling fights. In 2011, we came within days of not being able to pay our bills. In 2013, same thing. Each time a last-minute political deal saved us. But each time our credit rating took a hit and the world's confidence in American debt decreased a little more. We're playing Russian roulette with the global economy. And eventually, the chamber won't be empty. I want to share with you what happened in other countries that faced sovereign debt defaults. Because history is our best teacher. Argentina has defaulted 9 times in its history. Each time the middle class was devastated. People who worked their whole lives and saved money saw their savings become worthless. Riots in the streets, government collapse, economic depression lasting years. Greece defaulted in 2012 as part of the European debt crisis. Unemployment hit 27%. Youth unemployment exceeded 50%. Pensions were cut by half. People couldn't get their money out of banks. Suicides increased. This is what default does to a society. Russia defaulted in 1998, and the ruble lost 2/3 of its value almost overnight. People's bank accounts were wiped out. The country descended into chaos with oligarchs grabbing assets for pennies on the dollar while ordinary citizens suffered. These aren't ancient history. These are recent examples of what happens when governments can't pay their debts. And every single one of these countries had leaders saying right up until the moment of default that everything was under control. So what can you do to protect yourself from a potential US default? This is critical, so pay close attention. First, understand that traditional safe havens might not be safe. Treasury bonds, which financial advisors have recommended for decades as the safest investment, could be ground zero in a default scenario. If you have a heavy allocation to bonds, especially long-term treasuries, you need to reconsider your strategy. Diversification becomes absolutely essential, but not the traditional kind. You need to diversify across asset classes, currencies, and even countries. Physical gold and silver become incredibly important because they're nobody's liability. In every major economic crisis throughout history, precious metals have preserved wealth when paper currencies failed. I'm not saying put everything in gold, but having 10 to 20% of your wealth in physical precious metals makes sense given the risks we're facing. Real estate can be a hedge, but with major caveats. If you own property free and clear, it's a hard asset that has intrinsic value. But if you're heavily mortgaged and a default causes massive unemployment and economic contraction, you could struggle to make payments or find renters. Location matters enormously. Productive farmland holds value better than suburban condos in an economic collapse. Properties with water rights, timber, or other natural resources become more valuable. Foreign assets and accounts might seem extreme, but wealthy people have been doing this for decades. Having some money in stable foreign currencies, foreign bank accounts, or foreign investments provides a hedge if the dollar collapses. This isn't about tax evasion, which is illegal. This is about survival diversification. If the US goes through a default and currency crisis, having some wealth outside the blast zone could save you. Stockpile essential goods and develop practical skills. In a real economic collapse following default, your ability to provide for basic needs becomes paramount. Water filtration, food storage, medical supplies, tools and skills like gardening, basic repair work, and first aid become more valuable than money. This might sound like doomsday prepping, but it's just common sense risk management given the magnitude of what we're potentially facing. Build community and relationships. Your network becomes your safety net. During the Great Depression, people survived by helping each other, sharing resources, and creating local economic systems when the national economy failed. Start building those relationships now, join local groups, get to know your neighbors, develop trust and reciprocal relationships. The social capital could be more valuable than financial capital in a crisis. Consider your debt situation very carefully. In an inflationary default scenario, fixed-rate debt becomes easier to pay off as currency devalues. But if default leads to deflation and economic contraction, debt becomes crushing. The safest path is probably to eliminate high-interest debt, keep fixed-rate mortgage debt if the payment is manageable, and avoid taking on new debt. You want flexibility and you want to minimize your obligations because nobody knows exactly how this will unfold. Here's the political reality that makes this even more likely. Neither political party has the will to make the hard choices necessary to avoid default. Democrats want to maintain spending on social programs. Republicans want to cut taxes and maintain defense spending. Both parties refuse to touch Social Security and Medicare, which are the biggest long-term drivers of debt. Every election cycle, politicians promise easy solutions, cut waste and fraud. Economic growth will fix everything. But the math doesn't work, and everyone in Washington knows it. The political incentive is to kick the can down the road and let it be the next person's problem. But we're running out of road. The can is getting heavier, and when it finally stops, the impact will be devastating. The meeting that happened behind closed doors was acknowledgement of this reality. The people at the top are preparing for what they know is coming, even if they're not telling the public. I want to address something important. Some people will say I'm fear-mongering, that I'm being too pessimistic, that America has faced challenges before and always come through. And there's truth to that. We've overcome tremendous obstacles. We won 2 world wars. We survived the Great Depression. We rebuilt after the Civil War. American resilience is real, but every empire in history thought they were exceptional right up until they collapsed. Rome, Spain, Britain. Every single one believed their power was permanent. It wasn't. The difference between being prepared and being caught off guard is enormous. If I'm wrong and default doesn't happen, what have you lost by preparing? You've diversified your assets. You've reduced debt. You've built community connections. You've learned useful skills. None of that hurts you. You're actually in a stronger position regardless. But if I'm right and you haven't prepared, the consequences are catastrophic. You could lose everything you've worked your entire life to build. The signs are everywhere if you're willing to look. Record debt, unsustainable interest payments, foreign buyers abandoning treasuries, political paralysis, rising geopolitical tensions, weakening dollar. These aren't random data points. They're parts of a pattern that has played out repeatedly throughout history. And that pattern always ends the same way. Default, currency collapse, and economic crisis. Here's what keeps me up at night. The speed at which this could unfold. In today's interconnected digital financial system, a crisis that might have taken months to develop in the past could now happen in days or even hours. High-frequency trading, algorithmic selling, social media panic, global markets operating 24/7. Once the dominoes start falling, they could cascade faster than anyone can react. You won't have time to prepare once it starts. You need to be ready now. I'm going to be very direct with you. The American government is playing a dangerous game with your financial future. They're gambling that they can keep borrowing, keep spending, and somehow avoid the consequences that have destroyed every other country that followed this path. Maybe they're right. Maybe American exceptionalism is real and we'll find a way through. But do you want to bet your family's future on that? Do you want to risk everything on the competence of politicians who have been wrong about almost every major economic issue for the past 20 years? The smart money is already moving. Billionaires are buying farmland. Hedge funds are stockpiling gold. Foreign governments are diversifying out of dollars. They see the same data. You can see if you look. They're just acting on it while most Americans are distracted by social media, entertainment, and politicians telling them everything is fine. Don't be the last person to realize what's happening. History is not kind to those who ignore obvious warning signs. I want you to do something right now. Share this video. I don't say that to boost engagement. I say that because information is power and most people have no idea what's coming. Your friends, your family, your coworkers, they deserve to know. They deserve the chance to prepare. Send them this video. Post it on your social media. Start conversations. The more people who understand the risks, the better chance we have of either preventing this disaster or surviving it together. Subscribe to George Vance Live if you haven't already, because we're going to continue tracking these developments and giving you the information you need to make smart decisions. Turn on notifications so you don't miss critical updates. Leave a comment below telling me what you think. Do you believe the US could actually default? Are you taking steps to prepare? I want to hear from you. The meeting happened. The discussions are taking place. The people in power know we're heading toward a cliff. The only question is whether you're going to prepare for the impact or pretend it can't happen. That choice is yours, but you need to make it soon. Time is running out. This is George Vance bringing you the truth that mainstream media won't touch. Stay informed, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay ahead of the curve. Until next time, protect yourself and your family, because nobody else is going to do it for you.